Hare Krishna, very dear devotees. Welcome back once again for our ever ongoing series on the glories of our beloved Sri Vrindavan Dham. Happy to be with you. Namo Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Pashtaya Bhutale Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pacharane Nivishesha Shunyavadi Pastrita Deshatane. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. So, we are continuing with our series on our Acaryas' Samadhis in Vrindavan, and this will be part 5. In previous lectures, we learned of the criteria for a sadhu to be placed in samadhi. Devotees in general are usually cremated, but acaryas or sadhus who are advanced or who have contributed significantly to the practice and the spreading of Krishna consciousness are placed in samadhi. So just as there's a general criteria for Vaishnavas to be placed in samadhi, traditionally, in olden days, there were and there still are in some maths criteria for who can give samadhi to such great souls, who can participate in the ceremony. And that criteria is very interesting. It's as follows. Such a devotee who oversees placing the Acharya in samadhi, that devotee should be chanting at least 3 lakhs names every day. That's 300,000 names of Krishna a day. That's 192 rounds. And that devotee had to come from a Brahmana family background. He had to be very humble with others. He had to be respected in the devotee community. He had to be a very dear disciple of the Acharya that was being put into samadhi. Preferably, as the organizer of the event, he had to be a sannyasi or a brahmachari. And it's stated if not a brahmachari, he had to have been in the brahmachari ashram in his earlier years. Now these last 2 criteria played a very important part in establishing the samadhi of Srila Gaurkishore Das Babaji Maharaj. The last 2, that such a devotee had to be a dear disciple of the Acharya and preferably a sannyasi or a brahmachari. Now, as concerning the samadhi of establishing the samadhi of Gaurkishore Das Babaji, as we know, Srila Gaurkishore Das Babaji was the spiritual master of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. Actually, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati was his only disciple. And when Gaurkishore Das Babaji passed away in Navadvip, various very questionable devotees and moths wanted to immediately claim his body for the purpose of building a samadhi on their lands with the intention eventually of collecting money from those who in the future would come to visit the samadhi. And actually they were arguing amongst themselves at that time over the dead body of Babaji Maharaj. And when this news reached Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, who was in Mayapur at the time, on the Mayapur side of the Ganges, he crossed the Ganges River over to Navadvip in a boat. And it's described he came running to the spot where these pundits and Babajis and Vairagis were arguing about who would take Gaurkishore Das Babaji's sacred body. Now, seeing him coming, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, many of the questionable persons there started decrying Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. They knew why he had come. And they were saying, he's not a sannyasi, he doesn't have a math, he doesn't have a temple, so he wasn't qualified to take away the body of Gaurkishore Das Babaji. But at that point, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati became like a lion. We hear in his preaching, he was sometimes described as the lion guru. And he came up front directly in front of the assembly of these pundits and Babajis and Vairagis, and he openly challenged them. It's very famous. He said, any one of you who has not had illicit sex with a woman in the last 6 months, you can come forward and take the divine body of my spiritual master and place him in samadhi. And no one came forward. Then he said, any one of you who have not had illicit sex with a woman in the last 3 months, come and take the divine body of my spiritual master. And no one came forward. Then he paused and said, and if any of you who has not had illicit sex with a woman in the last 3 days, any one of you who has not had illicit sex with a woman in the last 3 days, you come forward and take the divine body of my spiritual master. And no one came forward. And at that point, all the pundits, these babas, these vairagis, they turned around and it's described with their heads lowered, they left that place. And Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati alone picked up the divine body of Srila Gaurkishore Das Babaji, carried him back across the river to Mayapur, where he established a samadhi for his Guru Maharaj. And of course many ISKCON devotees have visited that sacred place. So Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur fulfilled the 2 most important qualifications for putting a saintly person into samadhi. He was a loyal and dear disciple, and he was celibate at that time. He was a brahmachari, later became sannyasi. So now Shastra goes on to explain that the main person, again, who performs the samadhi ceremony should wear white cloth while performing the samadhi rituals. Most of those rituals we covered in a previous class, how to put someone in samadhi. Then the day after giving samadhi, this person should shave his head and facial hair and take bath 3 times in the Jamuna. And then he should feed sadhus, cows, crows, and dogs. Because they're all Brajbasis. Some of them are unfortunate. So that was part of the ritual. Now, there are certain other procedures prescribed for departed souls that don't apply to acaryas or advanced devotees. Such rites and rituals are known as Shraddha Karma, or perhaps more better known as Pindadhan, the particular ceremony. But for acaryas and great devotees, no such tradition of doing Shraddha Karma and Pindadhan is required. It's said in Shastra that these rites are done for a soul who doesn't achieve liberation after death and resides in lower planets after his departure. But acaryas and sadhus are the source of liberation in and of themselves because they preach Krishna consciousness. So what's the need of doing such rituals for sadhus, the Pindudan? A sadhu's activities in this material world are all divine, and therefore karma doesn't bind them up again after death. For them, going back home, back to Godhead is certain. So we don't perform such rituals for acaryas or advanced devotees after their departure. Now it's interesting that there's also a special period of 15 days in the month of September, which is known as Pitra Paksha, which is also dedicated to the ancestors. And these 15 days in India, during these 15 days in India, people perform these Shraddha Karma rituals, the Pitra Paksha, for their ancestors' liberation, for release from lower births and at least attainment of higher planets. So during these 15 days in September, it's traditional in India. People don't purchase goods, they don't go shopping, they don't celebrate any occasion, they don't wear jewelry, they're not even supposed to leave home. However, this is not the case in our beloved Sri Vrindavan Dham. There's a famous saying, Nitya Utsava Nityam Vrindavanam. Nitya Utsava Nityam Vrindavanam. It means, and it's so nice, in Vrindavan, every day is a festival. In Vrindavan, every day is a festival. So what do the Brajabasis do in these 15 days of Pitru Paksha, when the whole of India is very somber? Well, because every day is a festival in Vrindavan, during those 15 days, they celebrate the festival of Sanji Utsava, with great joy and pomp, by singing and dancing and making beautiful, colorful designs inside their homes and in the temples of Vrindavan. I believe we gave a whole class on this Sanji festival. And this is while the whole of India is, wearing pale clothes and, very somber. During that time, the Brajabasis, they recreate the divine pastimes of the Lord in their homes and temples with vibrant colors by making these beautiful designs on the floor. Now, in a deeper sense, Brajabasis celebrate Sanji because during that time it allows for the meeting of Radha and Krishna. How's that? Again, during these 15 days of Pratyapaksha, people are not allowed to leave home. Therefore, in Krishna Lila, like Krishna's pastimes 5,000 years ago, this was an opportune time, or this is an opportune time, for Radha and Krishna to meet somewhere, because everyone's home. Radha and Krishna can sneak out, and by the arrangement of Vrindadevi and Purnamasi, they can have their meetings. So, how do Radha and Krishna meet during Pratyapaksha? Well, once Sri Radha said to Lalita, "My mother-in-law, Jatila, told me that I cannot leave my room during Pitrupaksha, but how will I survive 15 days separated from my beloved Shyam Sundar?" So out of deep love for Srimati Radharani, Lalita immediately came up with a plan to unite Radha and Krishna. Lalita's idea was that in order to make the Sanji designs, which all the gopis are doing during that period, flowers are required. They're dried and made into colorful powders for making these designs on the ground in the houses and temples. So Lalita suggested to Jatila that Sri Radha be allowed to leave her quarters at Yavat for this most important service of collecting flowers for Sanji. And Jatila agreed because that was the tradition. So Sri Radha was allowed to go out and pick flowers to make powdered dyes for the Sanji. But needless to say, while picking flowers, Yogamaya arranged again for Radha and Krishna to meet. So while the mood around India is very somber during this 15 days, it's, as always, a very joyous time in Vrindavan because Radha and Krishna are meeting, verifying Nitya Utsava Nityam Vrindavanam. In Vrindavan, every day is a festival. Shri Vrindavan Dham Ki. Everything's orchestrated so nicely by Purnamasi in Vrindavan. Now, in fact, even the departure of an Acharya, an advanced sadhu, it's also celebrated in Vrindavan. We touched on this in a previous class as well. But even if just for the simple reason that the Acharya has achieved the fruit of his bhajan and has gone back home, back to Godhead. Actually, yearly, on the day of celebrating the departure of any particular Acharya, Brajabasis observe the day by singing the glories of that sadhu in a special traditional way known as Suchaka Kirtan. Suchaka Kirtan. Suchaka means to literally to declare or to make a declaration on an important day of the year. And on such a day, Brajabasis, celebrating the departure of Acharya, they sing different melodious songs written by various Bengali and Brajabasi poets for that departed Acharya or sadhu. Now, the tradition of singing Suchaka Kirtans, it actually became, I was reading, it became famous during the time of Srila Narottam Das Thakur. The reason being that during that period, many of the associates of Lord Chaitanya were slowly departing this world. There was I was reading, a flood of sorrow in those days, as news of the disappearance of various Acaryas and wonderful Vaishnavas and Vaishnavis. Everyone was in a flood of sorrow in Vrindavan and Bengal. Thus, in lamentation for our Acaryas, poets with, you could say, exceptional talent express the, the emptiness of their hearts and their misfortune in not being able to witness these Acaryas' pastimes in the material world anymore. So what they did is they wrote these Suchaka Kirtans, like poems, but to be sung. And such Kirtans, they first described the departed Acharya's esteemed character. And then the Kirtan went on to describe their various achievements and pastimes. And finally, their efforts to deliver the conditioned souls of this world, because that's a Vaishnava. A Vaishnava is concerned with the spiritual welfare of the whole world. And the climax of this singing this kirtan, it ended with deep lamentation for the Acharya, where the poet expresses his unbearable feelings of pain and sorrow. And as part of these Suchaka Kirtans, two teams of devotees would sit in groups facing each other, like an empty space in between them. And one line of the Suchaka Kirtan was sung by one group, and another line was sung by the other group. And it went on like this. It continued, this way, with the beating of drums, specifically, without the sound of kartals, bells. Only drums were used. And at that time, all the devotees wore white dhotis and uttaris, like this is an uttari, or upper cloth, and opened their sikas as a sign of mourning. Not just after the departure of Acharya, but every year. This was celebrated. The years that passed, every year they would have this festival. And this tradition of singing such kirtans, it's still famous, and it can be seen in Vrindavan, Orissa, and Bengal. And we will discuss the Suchaka Kirtans of different Acaryas in our next classes. We'll take each Acharya and sing. Well, I won't sing, but we'll repeat the beautiful verses composed by these poets in the past. But just to give you a glimpse of such kirtans, I will recite the Suchaka Kirtan that was written for Srila Rupa Goswami. Because his disappearance day was just, a week or 10 days ago. So I thought, just to give you an idea of where we're going here in our series, I'll recite his Suchaka Kirtan. There's many verses, of course. I'll just recite a few just to set the mood. Arimor Shri Rupa Ghoshai, Gauranga Chandera Bhav, Prachara Kariya Shaba, Janaite Hena Aranai, Vrindavan Nityadham, Sarvopari Anupam, Sarva Avatari Nandashuta, Tandra Ganta Ghana Dika, Sarvadhaya Shiradika, Tanra Saki Gana Sangajuta, Ragamarge Tahai Paite, Jahara Koruno Haite, Bochilo Paleo Jeto Jana. So again, there's more verses, but just to set the mood there. And this is the translation. Whoever was the poet who wrote this, we offer him our most humble obeisances, prostrated at his lotus feet, for glorifying our Srila Rupa Goswami, our Rasacharya. So, this is the Suchaka Kirtan written for Rupa Goswami, which is recited by followers in our Gaudiya Vaishnava Sampradaya on his disappearance day, in Braj, Orissa, and Bengal. Oh, my Rupa Goswami, your presentation of the devotional mellows of Lord Shri Gaurachandra is unparalleled. In the eternal spiritual world of Vrindavan, which is matchless and supreme, the source of all avatar sports as Nanda Maharaja's son, Sri Krishna. He always enjoys with thousands of gopis, and especially with his most beloved and best worshipper, Sri Radhika. Sri Rupa, you mercifully reveal the path of Raganuga Bhakti. By adopting this path, anyone can attain the spontaneous love the gopis have for Sri Krishna. Dear brother, nowhere will you find such kindness. Just meditate upon the lotus feet of Sri Rupa Goswami. Receiving Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's order, he thoroughly studied the Srimad Bhagavatam and extracted the essence of Prem Bhakti, pure devotional service. Rupa Goswami wrote many books which give love of God and fulfill everyone's desires. On the platform of Parakya Ras, pure Paramore love, Radha and Govinda enact intimate pastimes full of singing, dancing, and playing. After tasting the honey-sweet nectar of these pastimes and understanding the mood of Lord Chaitanya, you revealed this Parakya Rasa to the world. Feeling extreme separation from Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and suffering unlimited miseries, I speak like a madman and lament. My dear brother, when I, Radha Vallabha Das, try to express all these things, I feel great distress and wish to give up my life. Thank you, Radha Vallabha Das, for that wonderful poem, that wonderful kirtan, which we also, as members of ISKCON, can sing on the disappearance day of Sri Rupa Goswami. I think perhaps I'll publish the entire work somewhere in the next few days. So, thank you so much, Prabhus. We'll continue with our series next week. We're quite busy here on a Festival of India tour on the Baltic Sea coast here in Poland. We're coming to the conclusion of our summer here. The festivals have been extraordinary. Many thousands and thousands and thousands of people have come and relished their introduction to the wonderful world of Krishna consciousness. So we're also lamenting that it's almost over, but of course for all devotees the future is very bright. So we're looking forward to our next service. So thank you. I'll see you next Friday. Shri Shri Gauranitai ki, Shri Shri Krishna Balaram ki, Shri Shri Radhashama Sundar ki, Vrindavaneshwari Srimati Radharani ki, Shri Mayapur Dham ki, Shri Shri Gauranitai ki, Shri Krishna Sankirtan Yagya ki, Nitai Gaur Premanandi, Jai Jai Sri Sri Radhe Shan. All glories to